to the current court, which released yet another controversial ruling that will affect every single one of us, likely for generations. In a 6-3 decision, the anti-majoritarian majority significantly limited the government's ability to address climate change, ruling the Environmental Protection Agency cannot regulate carbon emissions from power plants. Instead, that power, so to speak, rests with Congress, said Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority. But if the past few years of Capitol Hill action are any indication, I won't be holding my breath, though with the degraded quality of air, I may have to. Here to discuss the ruling and possibility of its reason being extended to federal regulation of other things, healthcare, housing discrimination, and more, is Bill McKibben. Bill is, of course, the founder of the organization 350.org, which works to build a climate movement for a fossil-free future, Third Act, which works to bring people over 60 into that fight, also the author of dozens of books, including the groundbreaking The End of Nature in 1989, and his latest work, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders what the hell happened. Bill, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Pleasure, Jim.
You know, Bill, you wrote in your piece in the New Yorker today about a rallying cry that was put out by not yet then Justice Lewis Powell to businessmen 50 years ago. What did the memo say?
Well, this famous Powell memo was the sort of beginning of the fight back against, among other things, the formation of the EPA the year before and the passage of the Clean Air Act. And what he said is, we are going to have to use all the wealth at our disposal to win this country back. And this week, that's what we've been seeing. It's worth noting that all the decisions that we've seen, the decisions on guns, the decision on Roe, the decision on the Clean Air Act, target things that happened in that brief window of time, 1968 to 1973 or so. They've been waiting a long time and patiently building the wherewithal to decimate and destroy those decisions, and now they've done so. This has been an epic week in American political history.
So 5 decades later, what does this EPA decision mean for the country?
Well, this EPA decision means in the short run that it's going to be very hard for the EPA to do anything about climate change. It takes away most of their authority to regulate carbon. In the slightly longer term, it seems to be setting up a situation where the court will deny agencies in general the right to do much regulating. And for the world, and this may be the largest consequence, it undercuts any ability that America has to lead in this fight. The saddest person on the planet today has got to be John Kerry, because I don't have any idea how our international climate envoy goes and talks to the Chinese or the Indians after this.
Yeah, I want to get back to that, the tentacles of this potentially reaching well beyond the climate. Paris Climate Accords, I assume, eviscerated by this. The zero emission goals of Joe Biden, same category, no?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way that he can meet the targets that he's set, or it becomes infinitely harder without being able to do this kind of common sense regulation.
You know, I was thinking of you today when a listener unfortunately sent me a copy, which I had forgotten about, of Amy Coney Barrett at her confirmation hearing when she was asked, I think by Louisiana Senator John Kennedy, about what she'd read about the climate. Here's what Coney Barrett, now Justice Coney Barrett, had to say.
I'm certainly not a scientist.
I'm not saying you are.
I mean, I've read things about climate change. I would not say that I have firm views on it.
Well, she has firm views now. And let me just add to that part of what Chief Justice Roberts said in his opinion today. Capping carbon dioxide emissions at a level that will force a nationwide transition away from the use of coal to generate electricity may be a sensible solution to the crisis of the day. I can't even read any more of it. What was your reaction when you read those words, the crisis of the day, Bill McKibben?
I mean, as I wrote in the Globe earlier today, this Supreme Court decision will be visible in the geologic record for eons to come. There's nothing that the Supreme Court's done that will last longer than this, because at these are the crucial few years when we have to be turning the corner in this fight on climate change, and they just made it harder. Not impossible. There's some things we can do, but much, much harder.
I want to get to the possible in a couple of minutes. Just by chance, we had the mayor of Boston and the climate reporter for the Globe on our radio show today. And Mayor Wu, who you've praised as an environmental leader, says, well, she believes, I don't know if it was false optimism, I don't want to characterize it, but I'll let you know, local and state governments can fill a decent percentage of the hole. David Abel said the market, with technological advances, things like that. They weren't being naive, suggesting that it could fill the whole hole created by the disarming of the EPA. Are they on to something, or is that faint hope?
Well, look, we have real possibilities. I mean, that's what makes this so tragic. The price of renewable energy has plummeted in the last 10 years, down 90%. It's the cheapest power we've got. So we could move quickly now, but the power of vested interest to get in the way is enormous. They've done that now at the federal level. So yeah, in blue cities and blue states, people will try to do what they can, but it's frankly crazy to be tackling global warming one city at a time. We should be working at the very least as a nation to do this.
Yeah, but just staying on that for a second, you wrote about 1,000 things today, but one of the things I read, didn't you say that even, maybe it was the Globe, that even something like mileage issues or that sort of thing, those passed by a blue state like Massachusetts are subject to challenge with this court as well, no?
The court has indicated that next year it's going to take cases from the same Republican attorneys general in the fossil fuel states, challenging the right of one state to set, say, automobile emission standards. So they're trying to, and don't even try to get at the logic of what we're sending to the states and what, it's all just, these are the outcomes that they want. And man, you gotta say, Big Oil and the Koch brothers got what they paid for over 50 years.
You know, I want to return to what you said a minute ago that concerns me almost as much as the decision itself, the potential for this to be used much more broadly to challenge the so-called administrative state, as critics call it, the regulatory authority of a whole host of federal agencies. My take on this, as sort of a half-assed lawyer, is with a clean power plan not even in place right now, a typical Supreme Court would say, this case is not ready for us, it's not ripe, come back to us when the time is right. And the reason they took it anyway is because they wanted to make this kind of declaration in the EPA case, plant their flag, and then come back and do far more damage to regulatory authority across the board.
Well, and you said it in your introduction quite correctly. They're saying, as if butter wouldn't melt in their mouth, that what they want is for Congress to be supplying regulations. But anybody who's looked at our political system for the last 40 years knows that the idea that Congress is going to be writing explicit regulations about how much methane should, that's just fantasy land. That's why we have things like the EPA stuffed with experts who are good at this stuff. And that's why we give them the authority that they need in order to go act.
And for the people who don't follow the regulatory world, and frankly, I don't either, it's everything from public health to, earlier this year, they struck down the eviction moratorium, saying the CDC didn't have the regulatory power there, the quality of water, the quality of food, Obamacare regulations. It touches virtually every aspect of our life.
This is the billionaires leave me alone caucus that's triumphing at the moment, okay? And it's it's incredibly powerful. But, and here's the thing that I think is important to say. They've won these fights, but they've done it with tiny minorities of Americans behind them. These are hugely anti-majoritarian rulings. 90% of Americans want some common sense gun control. 70 or 65 or 70% want Roe upheld. 70% want action on climate. They have overreached. They've won for the moment, but they've opened themselves up to a backlash like we've never seen before if those of us who want progress in this country are able to seize this moment. This should turn what looked like it was going to be a rout for the Republicans in the fall elections. This should, if we take the fury that we're feeling now and channel it, there's a possibility of a really interesting political outcome going forward.
Can I appeal to your historical knowledge again, as I did at the beginning here? There was a similar situation. You and I both agree it's laughable to suggest this dysfunctional Congress is going to fix any of this, but I think it was, I may get the years wrong, 2000, when the Supreme Court said the FDA, I think, didn't have the power to regulate tobacco. And about a decade later, give or take a year, Congress actually did act. Tobacco is about as hard a nut to crack in terms of standing up to big business. Why were they able to do it then? Do you recall?
Well, I mean, it was because they mobilized hundreds of millions of Americans on the right side. They used the court system, in that case, successfully, and eventually they were able to summon that political authority. We can do it again, although it must be said big oil is stronger than big tobacco ever was. We can do it again, but it's going to take organizing. The real thing to remember here is why we had the Clean Air Act in the first place. It's because in 1970, 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, went into the streets for the first Earth Day. That was the biggest protest in American history. If we do that again, if we muster that kind of political intensity, then we have a chance. But otherwise, this slow drift towards a kind of theocratic fascism is going to continue. And it is the most depressing week of my life in that regard.
I want to spend the last minute and a second talking about what the targets of those mobilizations should be, because near the end of your New Yorker piece, you write, but beyond, and you meant beyond a narrowed Build Back Better, which is, I guess, remotely possible. It's hard to see exactly what the point of demanding federal climate action is now. Why march on the Capitol of the White House if the Supreme Court won't let elected leaders act even if they want to? So what is the target in this environment, Bill McKibben?
Two targets. One, we got to go after Wall Street too, the big banks and financial institutions that have done this job and that have the possibility of exercising power. But two, we do have to get engaged in this political fight. We have to elect people who will drop the filibuster and expand the Supreme Court. And once we elect them, then we have to not walk away, but go pressure them. Remember those Sunrise Movement kids who sat down in Nancy Pelosi's office and would not leave? That's going to have to be how we deal with even the people we elect, because we are so far behind the eight ball now that it's going to take real work over years.
When you utter the words, we got to put pressure on Wall Street, do you have trouble even having those come out as the last hope, at least now, for fixing this nightmare?
I actually think we can push Wall Street pretty hard. You know, our political system gives enormous power to red states. Wyoming has as many senators as California, but all the money ended up in the blue states. 65% of the GDP is in counties that voted for Biden. We can still reach that money. It's in New York and San Francisco and London. Those are places we can fight more easily than Montana and North Dakota.
I'll tell you, one of the few reasons for hope that I have is that you're still there. Bill McKibben, thanks so much for your time as always. I really appreciate it.